Charles Dickens is one of the most beautiful souls in all of literature, and his many masterpieces are testament to that. His books are warm companions that I read and draw nourishment from consistently, year after year. If I was stranded on a desert island, my choice of reading material, along with the complete works of Shakespeare and Austen, would most certainly be the complete works of Charles Dickens. So today I would like to show you my complete collection, ordered chronologically, which you can see behind me, give you a little tour of my Dickens bookshelf, and whether you are revisiting Charles Dickens or coming to his works for the first time, I would also like to share with you 7 top tips for how to read him deeply. Okay, so let's dive into the tips. My first tip for reading Dickens is to find your entrance novel into the universe. If you're already a Dickens connoisseur and you love his works and you're making your way through his oeuvre, you will recall with fondness your entrance novel. For many, it was Great Expectations. For others, it was David Copperfield. For some, it's Bleak House, and for others, the Pickwick Papers. It doesn't matter how you choose your entrance novel. Indeed, one might argue that you never really choose your entrance to Dickens. It's thrust upon us, usually by a teacher or somebody we respect. My own personal entrance novel to the works of Charles Dickens and to literature generally was Great Expectations. That novel was such an entrance to me, and it led me down a path from which I never strayed again. Reading Great Expectations as part of a group of lovers of literature was one of the most instrumental parts of my emotional, cognitive and spiritual development. Some readers try Dickens and abandon him and then wish to come back and try again many years later. Indeed, if that is you, you may have chosen the wrong entrance novel. And trust me, there is most certainly an entrance novel into the Dickens cosmos that is right for you. So what we're going to do right now is go through the shelf and we'll alight upon a few different potential options, and I'll give you a brief sketch and let me know which one you're gravitating to. You'll feel it in your gut. You'll feel yourself pulled to one novel over another, and follow your gut. Now, of course, if you want the choice to be made for you, thrust upon you, if you want me to put the book in your hand and say, here, just read this with us. As you may know, we are reading one of Dickens's masterpieces as part of the Hardcore Literature Book Club this Christmas season. So that's most certainly an option. But let's go through chronologically and see if we can find an entrance novel for you. If we start over here at the beginning of the shelf, we have the Pickwick Papers, split into 2 volumes in my edition, and indeed if you like the editions behind me, and I think you will, especially when we crack them open and look at some of the illustrations and the type, then you'll want to search out the Fabry Chapman and Hall Facsimile reprint. This collection was part of a monthly subscription in the UK some years back called the Dickens Collection, and each and every month you would receive a fresh novel in chronological order along with a little magazine that would tell you all about the world of that particular novel. It was tremendous, it was very collectible, it was great fun, and they make for lovely objects. They're, as far as I'm concerned, one of the most perfect ways to enjoyably consume Charles Dickens. But of course Dickens has been published endlessly in many gorgeous volumes, from Everyman to Penguin to Oxford World Classics, so there are volumes aplenty, volumes for everybody. Let's dive in and look at the Pickwick Papers briefly. Okay, so we've got volume 1 here and volume 2 here. Now, the Pickwick Papers was an early piece by Dickens, and you can already see glimmers and flashes of his brilliance. I'm personally very attached to the Pickwick Papers. If you enjoyed Cervantes' Don Quixote, and indeed many of you know that I absolutely love that novel, then you will like the Pickwick Papers. It is a Victorian Don Quixote. It's very humorous, it's very charming, the characters are beautifully, lovingly drawn, and the situations they get themselves into are hilarious. It's good fun and it's perfect for reading over the long term, and indeed, like pretty much everything Dickens wrote, it was intended for reading over the long term. The posthumous papers of the Pickwick Club came out in serial form, month to month, over the course of more than a year. Published from 1836 to 1837, Charles Dickens was the fresh young age of just 24, and the Pickwick Papers came out in 19 issues across 20 months. This is where we can see Dickens experimenting with some pesky cliffhangers to keep the readers coming back for more. And the Pickwick Papers is a great example of popular literature that is also high literature. Dickens, like Shakespeare, was a great entertainer, and he wrote primarily to entertain the masses, but he did demand something of the masses. This wasn't dispensable throwaway entertainment. Yes, it was a lot of fun, the characters were really resonant, and there was a lot to charm readers of all abilities and all levels and all backgrounds. But he's very much high literature too. And one of the markers of high literature is just how beautiful the prose is and how rereadable the book is. You wish to experience the tale between the cover time and again and bring your lived experience back to the work. And indeed, though I said Great Expectations was my gateway novel, the Pickwick Papers was the first Dickens I read at a very young age, and it is wonderful to return to it every other year or so. Let's have a look at some of the pictures, because they are absolutely delightful. You can see with the facsimile of the frontispiece here, I find the hand-drawn font to be really charming, and the illustrations, especially if you know the characters and the story, never fails to make me chuckle. Flipping through here, we can see Mr. Pickwick in chase of his hat. And quite a famous illustration here near the front of the novel. Mr. Pickwick addresses the club. What I love about the Pickwick Papers and the various editions you can obtain is just how replete with illustrations this is. And I absolutely adore the illustrations. I love the type font in this version. This is very humorous. If you like sketches of absurd situations, and if you like really visual language, if you like to see the characters, if you like to meet characters in novels, then the Pickwick Papers is a great one to start with. Now, a lot of people will disparage the Pickwick Papers and they'll put it in his lesser novels. When we talk of Dickens, many like to talk of his greater and lesser novels, and time and again I have seen many designate the Pickwick Papers as a piece of juvenilia as being part of his lesser novels. Whether that is the case or not, and yes, one could argue it, one definitely couldn't argue that it's not charming. It is utterly charming, and it never fails to put a smile on my face, and I'm pretty sure that this was the entrance, Dickens, to a lot of deep readers, so it could be very much up your street. Next on the shelf, next to the Pickwick Papers, we have Oliver Twist, an incredibly influential novel. Written in 1838, when Dickens was just 26 years of age. When one thinks of Oliver Twist, they immediately think of the workhouse and Please Sir, May I Have Some More? They think of the gang of juvenile pickpockets. They think of Fagin and the Artful Dodger. Yes, like the Pickwick Papers, this is a piece of juvenilia. This is one of Dickens's immature works, but it was incredibly influential and it remains charming today. An idea for somebody who is serious about getting into Dickens is to undertake a chronological reading of his work. You could portion out 1 or 2 novels per year and make your way through the catalogue. If you were to do that, you may wish to start with Sketches by Boz, move on to the Pickwick Papers, and then you'll have Oliver Twist. So it would be one of the first stories you enjoy on your Dickens journey. Now I'm going to pass over the 2-volume set of Nicholas Nickleby just for the time being, but let's alight upon the 2-volume set of The Old Curiosity Shop, published in 1840, when Dickens was 28 years old. By this point, Dickens had become immensely popular, and The Old Curiosity Shop in particular resulted in a tragedy at the wharf, at the docks. The barge that was carrying the latest instalment of The Old Curiosity Shop had gotten members of the general public incredibly excited, so they all congregated there and they were bustling so violently, jostling with one another, desperate to get their hands on the latest instalment, that people actually fell into the water and died. Now, just in case you are planning on reading The Old Curiosity Shop and you know nothing about it, I will not say much about it. Suffice to say, Oscar Wilde has a very famous and poor taste quote about The Old Curiosity Shop. This is an example of a facet of Dickens that some will scorn about him. I personally love it, but I know that people can sit on the fence with this, and that is the mode of sentimentality. Many charge Dickens with being overtly or too sentimental. Like I said, I absolutely love that. Show me sentimentality and you're showing me somebody who is passionate about the human condition, the human soul, and our common experience. It's a very sentimental novel, and if you flip to the first chapter in my edition, look at that beautiful illustration. That is absolutely gorgeous. And it begins with a sentiment taken from Dickens's own experience. As you may know, Dickens was something of a night walker, a bit of a lifelong insomniac. Dickens would traverse the streets of London for many hours at a time throughout the night. So, when you read Dickens, and if you know London, you'll get a good chuckle, you'll smile. It's like returning to an old friend, and that friend, unfortunately, is London. When you read Dickens, you realise he knows London very well. He knows its charms and its defects. He knows what to do and what not to do. He knows the characters that people the streets of London, and he writes with affection and understanding about this great city. We have something of Dickens's own night-walking habits kicking off the first chapter of The Old Curiosity Shop, when he says, "Night is generally my time for walking, although I am an old man." So that's The Old Curiosity Shop. Let's go on to another option for your gateway novel into the Dickens cosmos. Okay, here we're going to look at A Christmas Carol. Dickens wrote a ton of Christmas stories. I have 3 volumes worth of Christmas stories in this set. A Christmas Carol was published in 1843, which made Dickens the age of 31. And sorry to fans of these novels, but for the time being we are passing over Barnaby Rudge, 2-volume set, The American Notes, Martin Chuzzlewit, again 2-volume set, and we're alighting upon this volume of the Christmas books. Now, I really heartily recommend reading A Christmas Carol each year as part of a Christmas tradition. Christmas as we know it today in the West was half created by Charles Dickens. He was so effective at instilling love for one's neighbour and warmth and feelings of compassion and humanity around this time of year that people would walk out onto the streets and invite homeless children to come eat dinner with them. The idea of the Christmas dinner, the celebrations that we take for granted today, we wouldn't have them in the fashion that we enjoy today if it were not for Dickens. And his Christmas stories were incredibly popular. So popular that he wrote a new one each and every year, and it would be a huge hit, a huge bestseller. His Christmas stories are quite gothic, and they typically feature ghosts. Now, why would one write stories about ghosts and our mortality at the close of the year around Christmas time? Well, it's a Victorian tradition, but one that Dickens was heavily responsible for resurrecting, and he would influence writers like Henry James with The Turn of the Screw. The reason for considering and contemplating one's own mortality at the end of the year is because mortality is linked with morality. When we're conscious of our own nascent demise, when we're conscious of the potential for those we love and hold dear to perish around us, we stop taking things for granted, we stop acting in abhorrent ways, and we try to be better people. And Dickens, with his Christmas stories, very much did help people be better each and every year. And so the tradition, when Charles Dickens' Christmas stories were coming out, went a little bit like this. The father of a family would go and buy the edition in whatever magazine or periodical it would appear in, typically Charles Dickens' own, and he would bring it home and he would read it aloud to his family around the fire, or they would divvy up the roles. So it was a communal experience, it was very, very special, and it had the effect of bringing people together. Now, we take A Christmas Carol for granted today, because the tale of Scrooge and the ghost of Christmas past and present and future has been so adapted and manipulated and replayed a million times in movies across the world that we feel kind of sick of it. But it is a very special treat to actually go back to the original source and read the story for yourself. You'll realise that it's very much high literature, and it's the best of its kind. Every adaptation has somewhat failed to completely and faithfully capture the spirit of the tale, though there are many good ones. So I would implore you, if you want to have a little reading tradition that you indulge each and every year, reread A Christmas Carol, because it is beautiful. Let's look at the famous opening in this edition. Marley was dead to begin with. There is no doubt whatever about that. The register of his burial was signed by the clergyman, the clerk, the undertaker, and the chief mourner. Scrooge signed it. And Scrooge's name was good upon change for anything he chose to put his hand to. Old Marley was as dead as a doornail. So definitely don't discount A Christmas Carol as your potential entranceway to the Dickens cosmos. Let's check out another work. Now, apologies for passing over the 2 volumes of Dombey and Son for the time being. This is a novel that we don't see discussed very often with Dickens, but it's one of his greater works, and I know that it's a favourite of many lovers of Dickens, so it's worth considering. But let's alight upon Dickens's own personal favourite, David Copperfield. We have a 2-volume set here, and Dickens published this in 1849 at the age of 37, and we are now entering his middle period, his early mature or late immature period. David Copperfield, as you may know, is what we term a Bildungsroman, as is Great Expectations, a novel that follows a character from their early life all the way through their life. And David Copperfield, being one of Dickens's own personal favourites, as you can probably assume, he divested a lot of himself. He put a lot of himself into the spirit of this story. It's quite heavily autobiographical. What he was also doing, however, was sharpening his aesthetic skills, and this would have a really tangible effect when it came to Great Expectations, one of his masterpieces. Here's how David Copperfield begins. Whether I shall turn out to be the hero of my own life, or whether that station will be held by anybody else, these pages must show. David Copperfield is a great choice for an entranceway into the Dickens cosmos. Let's check out another one. We now have Bleak House, which is very much a masterpiece and a must-read. Bleak House is a crowning jewel in all of literature, the history of literature. Bleak House is tremendous. It's also a difficult work, and it's a hard one. If you're going to use it as an entrance to his world, you're picking up quite a challenging one. But hey, the challenge is very much worth it. As far as I'm concerned, we are now entering Dickens's mature period, and Bleak House also has one of my favourite openings in all of literature. London. Michaelmas term lately over, and the Lord Chancellor sitting in Lincoln's Inn Hall. Implacable November weather, as much mud in the streets as if the waters had but newly retired from the face of the earth. And it would not be wonderful to meet a megalosaurus, 40 feet long or so, waddling like an elephantine lizard up Holborn Hill, smoke lowering down from chimney pots, making a soft black drizzle, with flakes of soot in it as big as full-grown snowflakes. Gone into mourning, one might imagine, for the death of the sun. Now we have a really famous passage here. Fog everywhere. Fog on the Essex marshes. Fog on the Kentish heights. Fog creeping into the cabooses of Collier Briggs. Fog lying out on the yards and hovering in the rigging of great ships. Fog drooping on the gunwales of barges and small boats, fog in the eyes and throats of ancient Greenwich pensioners, wheezing by the firesides of their wards, fog in the stem and bowl of the afternoon pipe of the wrathful skipper down in his close cabin. Tremendous, isn't it? I could go on and on. You could just eat that prose, couldn't you? Okay, next up I'm going to pass over a couple of more great novels which are well worth checking out as well. We're also passing over A Child's History of England, which is a really charming piece of non-fiction on the part of Dickens, well worth reading, especially if you're interested in history. We're passing over Hard Times, which is a slim one, and the 2-volume set of Little Dorrit, another favourite of many people and a deep-cut Dickens. We're going to look at A Tale of Two Cities, which was published in 1859 when Dickens was 47 years old. A Tale of Two Cities is a great companion piece to Victor Hugo's Les Miserables, and it is one of the best-selling novels of all time, certainly one of Dickens's best-selling novels. Now, having said that, I don't personally rank it as one of Dickens's best, though it does sit in his mature phase. I think there are better novels. Having said that, though, I'm sure there are plenty of people who love A Tale of Two Cities. You may recognise the famous opening. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief. It was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light. It was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair. We had everything before us. We had nothing before us. As you can tell, Dickens is masterful when it comes to opening his his novels. Now we're going to pass over more of his non-fiction with The Uncommercial Traveller and reach one of my favourite books of all time. It's the 1860 to 1861 Great Expectations. And Dickens was 48 when he wrote this. I consider this Bildungsroman to be a masterpiece. It is up there with Bleak House and Our Mutual Friend as some really heavy-hitting Dickens. Every single word in this novel counts. You'll meet some of the most fantastic characters in all of literature, some really resonant themes, and it's one of those novels that, regardless of how old you are, you can get something out of it. It's great for young people, but it's even more impactful if you reread it at a later age, because suddenly you think, oh, that makes sense, and for me it does summon a lot of nostalgia, a lot of wistfulness, and it reminds me of my own follies as a young man and growing up as a child. I see a lot of Dickens in this novel, and I see a lot of myself. It is absolutely beautiful, and I would be completely confident putting that in your hands and saying, hey, if you haven't read Dickens before, please do try Great Expectations. Once again, we have a famous opening. My father's family name being Pirrip, and my Christian name Philip. My infant tongue could make of both names nothing longer or more explicit than Pip. So I called myself Pip, and came to be called Pip. Let's check out some of the pictures in this beautiful edition. We can see our central protagonist Pip here with Miss Havisham. Miss Havisham being one of my favourite characters in all of literature. And we can see the blacksmith Joe here, another one of my personal favourite characters in all of literature. So that's Great Expectations, and we're getting towards the end of Dickens's life and oeuvre. Here in 2 volumes we have the 1852 to 1853 Our Mutual Friend. Dickens is 52 years of age at the penning of this narrative, and we have a darker narrative. We can see Dickens trying to take his work in a little bit of a different direction. This is a very mature work. Some people discard it and scorn it, some people do not recognise its genius, but it is a masterpiece and it's well worth cracking into. It could well be, however, deep cuts Dickens. And this was the last full piece of work that Dickens completed before the railway crash that he was part of, and he was quite seriously injured. This rail crash put a lot of strain on his heart. He valiantly helped other passengers who were part of the chaotic derailment too. When I contemplate the end of his career, I do so with a lot of sadness because he was cut off a bit too young before his time. What novels would we have in our possession to enjoy had Dickens gone on living for many more years? We can only guess. And of course, in addition to the rail crash, Dickens was also ramping up how many lectures he was giving. He would travel all over the place and he would give readings from his books, and he put so much of his heart and soul into these readings that it put a very real strain on his heart and essentially finished him off. And finally we have the unfinished, incomplete Mystery of Edwin Drood, written and published in 1870 when Dickens was 60 years old. It's unfinished because Dickens only completed 6 of the 12 instalments, and we have no plans left by him, so we don't really know how it ends. Edwin Drood, along with Our Mutual Friend, shows Dickens to have been going in an exciting direction for the rest of his career. Now, I hope you enjoyed that foray into my Dickens collection. So the first thing you should do, whether you're a newcomer to Dickens or whether you've already enjoyed him before but want to get deeper into him, find the novel that will be your entrance into the cosmos. The novel that you so deeply fall in love with that you just wish to tear through everything, because that leads me on to my second top tip, which is to read Dickens with a long-term view. Make the decision, as one should do with Shakespeare too, to mine through his oeuvre over the long term. Take it slow, enjoy the journey, there is no rush, and use Dickens to punctuate your reading journey. So whilst you're reading other great works, make your way steadily, plodding through Dickens, and the rewards will be endless. The great thing about mining an oeuvre or a catalogue of a certain author is it helps us set up reading traditions, and as you know, I'm a huge fan of erecting traditions around our reading and having it help scaffold on to our life. If you read a Dickens each and every year, at the end of the year, you will always remember what you did for each year. You'll remember the end of the year of 2021, 2022 and 2023, because you'll be able to link it in your mind and say, that was the year I read X, Y, and Z Dickens really, really deeply and discussed it with others, and all this other stuff was happening, and I was having all these thoughts. My next tip for reading Dickens is to make sure you read into the heart of your childhood. Yes, there are many novels where Dickens deals with some very adult themes, but the core, the centre of most of his oeuvre is about childhood. There are few writers, and in fact I can't think of one that comes to mind immediately, that write children so compellingly, so faithfully, sincerely and genuinely, with such love and honesty as Dickens. So, as you're reading through, try to connect with that inner child deep inside you. My next tip is also to read without condescension when it comes to sentimentality and hyperbole. Dickens is not a hyper-realist. His characters, though some of them are, as Ian Forster says, round versus flat, he is not writing ultimately with a view of psychological complexity across the board. In that way, he's very different from the other main canonical English novelist, George Eliot. He writes with great flourish and exaggeration and enjoyment. He likes taking things to the extreme. He likes painting vivid characters. And he likes to indulge in emotion and sentimentality. So one mustn't condescend when reading Dickens. Just buy into it, go along for the ride, enjoy it, and you'll get all the more out of it. My next tip is to make sure you befriend the characters. When you're reading, see them. Slow down, take in their description, understand who they are and what they're all about. Pretend as though they are real people because, to all intents and purposes, many of them are real people. The only writer who has more varied and rich persons in his universe than Dickens is Shakespeare. Dickens has really peopled his world with some of the most beautiful representations or expressions of humanity that you'll find absolutely anywhere. So as you make your way through the catalogue, enjoy meeting all the different characters and learning what makes them tick, because the heart of the Dickens novel is the characters that people the world. My next tip is to make sure you trust Dickens and trust the pace he's leading you at. He's a very skilled novelist, he knows what he's doing, he knows how to get a certain effect in the reader, so place your trust in him. This is something that we must do with Proust as well, a novelist who is not comparable to Dickens, but trust that Dickens is taking you on an adventure that is well worthwhile, because he most certainly is. And finally, try to read serially if the fancy takes you. As we've mentioned, Dickens produced these works over the course of a year or longer, and they came out in weekly and monthly instalments. So there is an aspect of needing some delayed gratification in order to really understand the effect that his stories would have had on the first readers. Now, you may not wish to take it quite that slow, but if you look up the serialised publication schedule, the original schedule, make sure you take a little pause and note and mark your impression as you read along. So when you come to a point that would have been a cliffhanger for the first reader and would have required a period of a week to elapse before you found out what happened next, figure out how that would feel if you couldn't read on. This is a really valuable thought experiment to do. And that's it from me for now. Please let me know your experience with Dickens, what you think of him in the comments below. If you have already enjoyed him before, if you enjoy him consistently, then please share with us your favourite Dickens novel. And indeed, if you haven't come to Dickens yet in any meaningful way, please let us know which novel you're choosing to start with. As I said before, if you want the decision to be made for you, then the Hardcore Literature Book Club is reading a masterpiece by Charles Dickens this year, over the course of December together. Thank you very much for watching, everybody. Happy reading, and speak soon. Bye bye.